feel for those girls and what I feel for my wife, but none of this would have happened. So I wasn't thinking.
Chris Watts shocked the world when he committed one of the most unsettling crimes in recent history. He murdered his pregnant wife, Shanann, and their 2 daughters, Bella and Celeste.
So the court is going to sentence Mr. Watts as follows. The court is going to sentence you to life in the Colorado Department of Corrections.
Now locked away in a maximum security prison, he lives a life of isolation and fear, haunted by his actions. But what does daily existence look like for a man who committed such heinous acts? How does he cope with the weight of his crimes? Join us as we reveal how the Denver monster spends every moment of his life sentence. Chris Watts' seemingly ideal life. Before the recent tragedy, Chris Watts seemed to have the perfect life. He was a husband to Shanann, a lively and ambitious woman who adored her family. Together, they had 2 beautiful daughters, Bella and Celeste, who lit up every room they entered. On social media, Shanann often shared happy family photos, stories of their love, and updates about their life. From the outside, they seemed like the perfect American family, a big house, loving parents, and a new baby on the way. But behind closed doors, cracks were beginning to form. Chris had a stable job in the oil industry, providing the family with financial security. Shanann was hardworking, managing her career and family with pride. Yet not everything was as it seemed. Financial struggles were mounting, and the once happy couple had started to drift apart. Shanann's social media posts, which painted a picture of a flawless family life, were a stark contrast to the tension brewing behind the scenes. But what if we tell you that this is where you'd want to pay more attention to the story, as it gets even more chilling from here? Then, there was Chris himself. He wasn't the loving, devoted husband and father that everyone believed him to be. Over time, he had grown cold and distant, leaving Shanann to wonder what was happening to the man she fell in love with. Behind her back, Chris had started an affair with another woman, a secret that would soon shatter their world. He was living a double life, and the weight of his lies was growing unbearable. But despite the problems they were facing, Shanann held on to hope. She believed they could work through their issues and rebuild their relationship. She was excited about the arrival of their 3rd child, a boy they planned to name Nico. She thought this new chapter in their lives would bring them closer together. But Chris had other plans, dark, unthinkable plans that no one could have imagined. As Shanann worked to save their marriage, Chris was pulling away further, consumed by his secret relationship and an apparent lack of concern for his family's well-being. It was as if he had already decided to leave them behind, emotionally and physically. The man who once vowed to protect and love his family was slowly becoming someone unrecognizable. This was the Chris Watts no one saw, the man hiding behind smiles in family photos and pretending to be the doting husband. His ability to mask his true intentions was scary. Friends, neighbors, and even Shanann had no idea that the seemingly perfect husband and father was capable of such horrific betrayal. But what horrific betrayal are we talking about? What really happened in the Watts household that changed everything? The night that changed everything. On the night of August 12th, 2018, everything seemed normal in the Watts household, at least on the surface. Shanann Watts, who was 15 weeks pregnant with their 3rd child, returned home from a late-night business trip to Arizona. Surveillance footage captured her arriving around 1:48 a.m., stepping inside the house with her suitcase. But what happened after she walked through that door is nothing short of horrifying. Inside the home, Chris Watts was waiting for her. At this point, his double life was spiraling out of control. He was deeply entangled in an affair with another woman, Nicole Kessinger, who knew little about the depth of his deception. Chris had been leading Shanann to believe they could still fix their crumbling marriage while secretly dreaming of starting a new life without her, or their 2 daughters, Bella and Celeste. When Shanann returned home, the couple reportedly argued. Shanann, always open about her feelings, likely confronted Chris about his cold behavior, their financial troubles, or possibly even his affair. Chris later claimed that Shanann told him he'd never see his daughters again during this argument, though this statement has been widely questioned. Whether that confrontation happened or not, Chris made a chilling decision that would change everything forever. In a moment of unimaginable betrayal, Chris strangled Shanann to death in their bedroom. This wasn't a sudden outburst. It was premeditated. Investigators believe he had already decided to end Shanann's life and his family's, likely influenced by his desire to be free of the life he had built with her. As Shanann lay lifeless, Chris faced another devastating reality. His daughters, Bella, 4, and Celeste, 3, were still in the house. What happened next is even harder to comprehend. Chris claimed later that Bella walked into the room and asked, "What's wrong with their mother?" So in a chilling attempt to cover his actions, he told her Shanann wasn't feeling well, but his plan was far more sinister. Chris carried Shanann's body to his truck, placing it on the floor of the back seat. Then he put Bella and Celeste, alive and likely scared, into the truck as well. These were his daughters, the little girls who looked up to him as their protector. Yet Chris had already decided their fate. At around 5 a.m., Chris drove his truck to an oil field where he worked. The site was isolated, surrounded by nothing but open fields and the tall tanks of oil storage. It was here, under the cover of darkness, that Chris carried out the rest of his horrifying plan. First, Chris smothered Celeste with her favorite blanket while Bella watched. The older daughter must have known something terrible was happening. Through tears, she reportedly begged her father, but Chris, driven by his monstrous determination to erase his family from his life, ignored her pleas. He ended Bella's life in the same horrifying way. Chris then disposed of his family's bodies in the most callous manner imaginable. He buried Shanann in a shallow grave nearby. For Bella and Celeste, he chose an even crueler fate. He stuffed their small bodies into separate oil tanks. A shocking and inhumane act that left investigators and the public horrified when the truth came to light. So after committing these unimaginable acts, Chris tried to resume his life as though nothing had happened. He sent Shanann's phone several text messages, pretending to look for her. He even called her friend, Nicole Atkinson, who had dropped Shanann off earlier that night. When Nicole couldn't reach Shanann the following morning, she became worried and contacted the police. When officers arrived at the Watts home later that day, Chris appeared calm but somewhat nervous. He allowed the police to search the house and showed no immediate signs of guilt, but his story quickly began to fall apart because Shanann's car, purse, and phone were still at the house, which made no sense if she had left willingly. Chris initially told investigators he had no idea where Shanann or the girls had gone. He claimed they were likely at a friend's house or had left on their own. But as the days passed, his demeanor became more suspicious, and inconsistencies in his statements raised red flags. When police brought him in for questioning, Chris struggled to maintain his lies. A polygraph test revealed deception, and soon after, he confessed, but only partially. In an attempt to shift blame, Chris claimed that Shanann had killed their daughters in a fit of rage, and that he had killed her in response. This shocking accusation further tarnished his image and left everyone who knew Shanann outraged. So under pressure and with mounting evidence against him, Chris finally admitted to killing his entire family. His confession revealed the full scope of his cruelty and selfishness. Investigators were able to piece together the night's events based on his statements, phone records, and the horrifying surveillance footage from his neighbor's security camera, which showed Chris loading his truck that morning. Undoubtedly, the murders of Shanann, Bella, and Celeste sent shockwaves across the nation. In the aftermath, Shanann's friends and family worked tirelessly to preserve her memory and the legacy of her children. Through their grief, they reminded the world of the light that Shanann, Bella, and Celeste brought into the lives of everyone they knew. Now you may be wondering what has become of the man who committed such a horrifying act. Think no further, because today, Chris Watts now sits in a maximum security prison, serving 5 life sentences without the possibility of parole. Stripped of freedom and surrounded by the repercussions of his monstrous actions, his existence has taken on a new and haunting shape. But what does life look like for one of the most infamous criminals in America? Is he tormented by guilt, ignored by others, or still wearing the mask that fooled everyone before? Let's delve into his prison life and explore the reality he faces every single day. Chris Watts' life in a maximum security prison. It is no news that Chris Watts serves his multiple life sentences at Dodge Correctional Institution in Wisconsin, far from the Colorado town where he committed his crimes. For him, every day starts the same, waking up to the sound of heavy steel doors clanking shut and the monotonous routines of prison life. He lives in protective custody, separated from the general population to keep him safe from other inmates. Despite his isolation, he can never escape the whispers, the stares, or the weight of his infamy. Watts spends much of his time in a small, stark cell. The walls are bare, the bed is hard, and the only signs of the outside world come from the faint light filtering through a narrow window. His daily schedule revolves around basic routines: meals served on a plastic tray, brief recreation periods, and moments of silence where he's left alone with his thoughts. There are no comforts here, no family dinners, no laughter, no love. It's far from the life he once had. But it's the life he chose the moment he took his family's lives. But even in isolation, the judgment doesn't stop. Guards keep a watchful eye on him, not just to prevent him from harming others, but also to ensure his own safety. The other inmates are well aware of his crimes, and in prison culture, there's no forgiveness for someone who kills their own children, so Watts's life in prison is marked by fear. Most inmates avoid him, unwilling to associate with someone they despise. For the few who dare to interact, it's often out of curiosity rather than kindness. Watts has no close allies, no friends, and no sense of belonging. He is hated by many, ignored by others, pitied by none, and even tagged an outcast. Although he claims to have found religion, some question whether his newfound faith is genuine or just another mask to shield him from the crushing weight of his guilt. Watts has reportedly expressed remorse for his actions, but his words often feel hollow. Is he truly sorry for what he did? Psychologists who have studied his case believe that Chris Watts's ability to compartmentalize his emotions, the same skill that allowed him to lead a double life, might also help him survive prison. But that doesn't mean he's free from torment. Some nights, the walls of his cell feel like they're closing in, the silence is deafening, and the memories of that night play over and over in his mind like a never-ending nightmare. He might try to convince himself he's at peace, but deep down, the reality is far more complicated. The knowledge that he betrayed and destroyed his own family is a weight he will carry for the rest of his life. Pope Francis mentioned the name of Jesus on live TV, and the unexpected happened. What he said was so touching, and it even brought out tears from people's eyes. Those words really hit many persons right in their heart. Lately, a lot of people have been questioning the actions and words of the Pope, and everyone has been eagerly waiting to hear his response to all of these. What is going on in the Catholic world? And what did Pope Francis say in all of these? Let's start with the Pope visit to Singapore and what happened there. In his meeting, the Pope was speaking to a crowd of young people. He was only emphasizing on the unity of humanity in the pursuit of the divine, regardless of religious differences. His message was simply about the shared goal of all faiths to reach God, even if their paths differ. In his speech, Pope Francis stated that all religions serve as different ways to connect with God, comparing them to languages. While the specific beliefs and practices of Sikhs, Muslims, Hindus, Christians, and others may seem distinct, they are different expressions of the same quest for a relationship with the divine. By talking about religions in this way, the Pope invited his listeners to view the world's faiths not as opposing or contradictory, but as complementary paths converging toward the same ultimate goal, which is communion with God. When the Pope said that God is God for everyone, he was pointing as the universality of the divine. His question, "But my God is more important than yours.
È più importante del tuo. But my God is more important than your God.
Is this true?" was a rhetorical one meant to challenge the notion that no religion has to monopolize the truth or God. Every religion always claims that their God is better or supreme. But in Pope's view, there is only one God, and that God transcends the divisions humans create through different religious systems. This perspective, while so many Christian theology is against it, opens the door for deeper interfaith dialogue and mutual respect. By shifting the focus away from religious superiority and toward a shared understanding of the divine, Pope Francis called for a more unified approach to spirituality. His message to young people was to urging them to avoid bullying and religious intolerance, tied directly into this broader vision. Bullying in this context is not just in the personal sense, but in the larger cultural and societal tensions that arise from religious misunderstandings. Pope Francis is aware of the conflicts that have historically been fueled by religious differences, sought to encourage the next generation to look beyond these divisions. In fostering an environment where dialogue and mutual respect can thrive, he believes that young people can help bring about a future full of peace and cooperation among different faiths. The Catholic Church has long recognized the presence of goodness and truth in non-Christian religions, and this concept has been affirmed in church teachings for decades. The Second Vatican Council, for instance, acknowledged that all people are called to union with Christ and emphasized the role of the Church in salvation. But Pope Francis's main idea seemed to extend the whole theory further by placing non-Christian religions are not merely at preparations for the gospel, but as valid paths in their own right, which leads to one God. This stirred up the whole debate. You mean that whatever anyone is serving all leads to one God? By stating this, Pope is only trying to unify all religions. He echoed a sentiment that has gained traction, which is that the truth and spiritual growth can be found outside of one's own faith tradition. His metaphor of religions as languages tries to illustrate this point clearly. Just as languages are different ways of communicating, religions are different ways of seeking and understanding the divine. What matters, the Pope implied, is not the specific religious tradition one follows, but the sincerity of the search for God. This perspective places emphasis on the common spiritual desires that unite humanity, rather than the doctrinal differences that separate us. In an increasingly globalized world, where religious and cultural diversity is more apparent than ever, the Pope's encouragement to engage in meaningful conversations with people of other faiths is particularly relevant. He urged young people to open their hearts and minds to those who practice different religions, fostering understanding and empathy rather than division. In doing so, Pope Francis emphasized that true dialogue is not about compromising one's own beliefs, but about building bridges of understanding and respect between faith communities. The Vatican's published text of the Pope's speech further reinforced this idea by identifying non-Christian religions as paths to arrive at God. Though a slight difference in translation appeared in the official English version, the essence of the message remained unchanged. By acknowledging these religions as genuine attempts to reach God, Pope Francis validated the spiritual efforts of millions of people worldwide who seek to live in harmony with the divine through their own traditions. This recognition of the value of other religious paths aligns with the Pope's broader mission to promote a more inclusive and compassionate worldview. In encouraging this broader understanding of religion, for him, he did not diminish the importance of the Catholic faith or its teachings. Instead, he wanted to place Catholicism within the context of a larger spiritual framework, one that recognizes the diversity of human religious experience. His speech in Singapore fit within his ongoing efforts to build a world where people of all faiths can live in peace and mutual respect. Pope Francis traveled through Asia and Oceania on his papal tour, and he continued to spread his message of unity and interfaith. The countries he visited, including Indonesia and Singapore, have a lot of religious traditions. That's why the Pope called for cooperation and understanding. His message was not only about his personal beliefs, but also a response to the realities of the modern world, where religious pluralism is an everyday fact of life. But the core traditionalists of the Church are against it. Many start finding faults even far beyond what he even said in Singapore. Another thing that has provoked many is Pope Francis' perspectives on same-sex marriage. Speaking during an interview, the Pope addressed a variety of topics, but none stood out more than his explanation regarding the blessing of same-sex couples. The Vatican's dicastery for the doctrine of the faith had issued a declaration which was fiducia supplicans, meaning trustee in treaty. It has stirred serious controversy, particularly for its guidelines on the blessing of same-sex couples. Many were very angry and confused by what seemed to be a departure from traditional Catholic teaching. In this interview, Pope Francis wanted to clarify the Vatican's stance and give his insights into his personal approach to the matter. But he didn't know that things would get worse. The Pope was very clear in explaining that what had been allowed was not really the blessing of a same-sex union, but rather the blessing of each individual person. He firmly stated that a union between two people of the sex cannot be blessed in the Catholic Church because it is not a sacrament. Pope Francis emphasized that while the Church cannot bless a sex union as a sacrament, it does not mean that the Church turns away or excludes individuals. In fact, the Pope's message was one of inclusivity, stressing that every individual person is worthy of blessing, regardless of. His explanation directly addressed the ongoing tension within the Church regarding how to approach issues related to. Many Catholics, especially in more conservative circles, have expressed concerns that allowing blessings of couples would blur the line between church teachings on marriage and societal acceptance of different relationships. So Pope Francis drew a sharp distinction between the union itself and the individuals within that union. While he clearly said that the union cannot be blessed because it does not align with the sacramental understanding of marriage, he emphasized the importance of welcoming and affirming the dignity of every individual. Do you know what even made people more furious? On LGBTQ rights, Pope Francis stated that love can be found anyway, and he is not God to judge any man. Many said that by the Pope saying this, he is encouraging LGBTQ, that given his position, he should totally be against it. What stands out in Pope Francis's words,
he's announcing that he's going to do things differently,
is the compassion and understanding he displayed toward individuals who might feel alienated by the Church's teachings. His message reflects his ongoing efforts to balance the upholding traditional Catholic doctrine while also embracing a pastoral approach that emphasizes love, mercy, and inclusion. He recognized that the issue of same-sex unions.
Last week, news broke that Pope Francis had said he supported civil union couples
Is a deeply personal and sensitive one for many people.
By people who think that the same bill would destroy their version of the family.
And he was careful to ensure that the Church's stance on such matters is not interpreted as a form of exclusion or rejection. The Pope stated that the Church is called to bless every person and that God's love is available to all. We should judge anyone on their choices. Pope Francis was only trying to use a language of care that shows his understanding of the complexities of modern life. He acknowledged that the Church's teachings on marriage and natural law are clear, but he also pointed out that the Church must never lose sight of the humanity of individuals. His message was that while the Church may not bless a union that goes against its teachings, it is called to walk with all people, offer spiritual guidance and support as well. He explained that blessings are not restricted by one's state in life or their specific relationships. Blessings are, at their core, a recognition of God's presence in a person's life and an affirmation of their dignity as a beloved creation of God. Therefore, every person, regardless of or relationship status, is deserving of such a blessing. This is an important distinction in the Pope's message. While the Church cannot endorse or bless certain unions, it must always recognize the dignity of every individual and bless them. Pope Francis also took the opportunity to delve into the principles of natural law, which form the foundation of the Church's teachings on marriage and family. According to natural law, as interpreted by the Church, marriage is not merely a social or legal contract, but a sacred covenant between a man and a woman. This understanding is in both scripture and tradition, and it is this sacramental nature of marriage that the Church seeks to protect. The Pope was clear that this teaching is not subject to change, as it reflects what the Church believes to be the divine will. But he is just aware of the challenges posed by these teachings in today's world. In addressing the question of whether or not the Church has changed its position on same-sex unions, Pope Francis made it clear that the Church's teachings remain intact. However, his emphasis on blessing individuals rather than unions. He acknowledged that some may be scandalized by the idea of blessing individuals in relationships. But why? He has emphasized that every person, regardless of their circumstances, is deserving of God's love and mercy. Pope Francis is just trying his own efforts to foster a spirit of understanding and love within the Church. He urged Catholics to move beyond rigid and dogmatic interpretations of tradition, encouraging them instead to engage with the world in a way that shows the Church's mission to be a source of healing and reconciliation. He spoke of the need to respect tradition while also being open to the realities of the present moment. For Pope Francis, tradition is not something to be idolized or held tightly onto at the expense of care. Rather, it is a living reality that must be engaged with in a way that serves the people of God in every generation. Throughout, Pope Francis has not shied away from difficult questions or complex issues, but instead sought to address them with both clarity and compassion. He has also spoken on environmental issues, political issues, and many.
It seems clear to me also that climate change is a problem we can no longer be left to a future generation.
But the problem here is many Christians, Catholic leaders, traditionalists, are seeing all these moves as shifting away from the main principles of the Church and Christianity as a whole. And all these have brought about so many issues. What exactly is the problem that they are circling on? This is one of the most interesting parts of all these. Stay tuned as we dive further into it. How the Pope teachings contradict the Church doctrine. Pope Francis, being leader of the Roman Catholic Church, holds a very high-profile position that naturally attracts a lot of attention. And so it's okay for his statements, teachings, and principles to spark debates and controversies, but what is happening currently is totally on another level. As the case with many high-profile figures, some of his words and actions have been misunderstood or met with intense criticism. While some appreciate his efforts to bring the Catholic Church into the modern age, others see his teachings as a departure from tradition. This has invited criticism from both conservatives and progressives within the Church down to secular voices. Starting from his speech in Singapore, supporting all regions, many are against it, saying people worship who they want to worship and God's name shouldn't be dragged or attached to it. From there, people are bringing out all what he had said that doesn't sit right or contradict Christianity theories.
Definitely something that I strongly resonate with, and something that I feel is especially crucial in a lot of political upheaval and turmoil that the world faces today.
As previously mentioned, one of the areas where Pope Francis has garnered the most attention and controversy is his stance on LGBTQ rights. His famous statement, "Who am I to judge?" This openness did not sit well with conservative factions within the Church, who view his statements as inconsistent with traditional Catholic teachings on. Although Pope Francis has never changed Church doctrine on same marriage, his suggestion that same couples deserve civil unions and legal protections has troubled many conservative Catholics who believe he is sending mixed signals. One of the biggest criticisms levied against Pope Francis has centered around his handling of the issues of inappropriate priest behaviors and power abuse. The Catholic Church has faced decades of scandals related to priests who committed abuse and how he knew about it and covered up for it. Pope Francis has taken several steps to address this issue. For instance, in 2019, he held a summit at the Vatican dedicated to addressing misconduct in the Church, and he abolished the pontifical secret in abuse cases, a move that was aimed at increasing transparency.
Church on difficult, sometimes controversial issues that not everyone supports.
Despite these actions, many critics feel that Pope Francis has not done enough. Some have accused him of being slow to remove bishops and priests who were involved in cover-ups. Many said they even wrote to him concerning this ongoing misconduct from the priest, but he didn't respond to the letters. Victims and advocates of reform argue that while Pope Francis has expressed remorse and taken some steps toward accountability, systemic changes, they should be zero tolerance for bishops who were involved in such act. They believe that the Church has not gone far enough in providing justice to survivors, or ensuring that those responsible for the cover-ups face appropriate consequences. Another criticism Pope Francis faces is his focus on environmental issues. Many pointed that the Pope is becoming more involved in works outside the Church. Pope Francis had talked about the need for urgent action to combat climate change and protect the environment in one of his letters. He stated that caring for the earth is a moral obligation, urging governments, businesses, and individuals to reduce their carbon footprints and preserve natural resources. But this sparked criticism from conservative Catholics and political figures. Some saw the Pope's involvement in climate change discussions as an overreach of his role as a spiritual leader. They argued that environmental issues, while important, are political matters and not within the Pope's domain.
International politicians to agree to a new global deal to combat climate change. Christian, Buddhist, Muslim, and Jewish leaders were among those attending the gathering at the Vatican hosted by the Pope.
Critics felt that the Pope should focus more on spiritual and doctrinal matters rather than intervening in political and environmental debates. Again, Pope Francis tried to shift the Church focus from a rigid doctrine to a more pastoral and merciful approach, and following today's world. While he has not changed core teachings of the Church, his emphasis on mercy, inclusion, and understanding has led some to accuse him of creating confusion around doctrine. His apostolic exhortation, Amoris Laetitia, meaning the joy of love, is an example of this. In this document, Pope Francis opened the door for divorced and remarried Catholics, who had previously been barred from receiving communion, to participate in the sacrament under certain circumstances. This was seen by some as a compassionate move, recognizing the complex realities of modern relationships. But the document sparked serious controversy within the church. Traditionalists and theologians argued that allowing divorced and remarried Catholics to receive communion without having their previous marriages annulled contradicted long-standing church teaching. Some bishops openly criticized the Pope, leading to what has been called one of the most serious doctrinal disputes within the church in decades. This debate is a growing division between those who support Pope Francis's more inclusive vision of the church and those who want to maintain traditional discipline and doctrine. Pope Francis has been outspoken on political and economic matters, particularly when it comes to social justice, poverty, and inequality. He has frequently criticized the excesses of capitalism and what he sees as the dehumanizing effects. In one speech, he referred to unbridled capitalism as the dung of the devil. His perspective on economic justice has been praised by some, but it has also angered many people who believe that his views are overly political and anti-capitalist.
Pope Francis at the Vatican today. The Pope invited the players to discuss social justice and economic inequality.
Another area of controversy involves Pope Francis's outreach to the Muslim world. The Pope has emphasized the importance of interfaith dialogue and has taken steps to improve relations between Christians and Muslims. He made a historic visit to the Arabian Peninsula, where he signed a document on human fraternity with the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar, calling for peace and cooperation between the two faiths. While many saw this as a positive move toward fostering understanding and peace, others, particularly conservative Catholics, viewed it as a dangerous dilution of Catholic identity. Some critics have argued that Pope Francis has been too willing to overlook the theological differences between Islam and Christianity in the pursuit of interfaith harmony. Pope Francis has faced criticism over his style of governance and the way he has handled dissent within the church. His more informal, decentralized approach to governance, which involves encouraging local bishops to make decisions based on their specific cultural contexts, has been seen by some as weakening the authority of the papacy. Critics argue that this could lead to confusion and inconsistency in the application of church teachings around the world. The Pope's action to bypass traditional ways and channels of consultation, and also the rigid ways the church operate, has caused a lot of arguments. Many are totally against him and his principles, teachings, and theories. Everyone has feelings, and the Pope is a human being like all of us. Reflecting on all of these, how his words, effort to unity everyone, and teachings are misinterpreted, and the ugly things people are saying about his principles, is more than enough to make him wipe or give up on everything. But the Pope has not. He will continue his works and fulfill his duties as a Pope. But when he spoke on TV on all of these, it made many people tear up realizing what the Pope has really faced in his journey. What are your thoughts on the Pope's teachings? Drop it in the comment section below. If you enjoyed watching this video, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more. Also, click the next video shown on your screen. You will enjoy it.